Hi there, this is Toby from Toby Urban Sketch, and today I'm going to show you on this nice big piece of paper how to make some effective and fun splashes and splatters when you're doing some urban sketching. And this is all using watercolour paint today. And I'll do a couple of little doodles to show you some effects with a little pen as well. If you enjoy, please hit like and subscribe to my channel. And also I love reading comments, so let me know if there's anything you enjoyed in particular or anything else you'd like to see more of. Cool, so let's start. I think there's a few different ways we can create splashes, and the point of them is normally just to bring a bit of life or energy or just texture and interest to a painting. The most obvious way to do it is with our brush. If we are going to add splatters, we need plenty of water. So I'm just going to use a really bright colour here. So I use my Scarlet Lake. And we can see, if I just make it very watery, and then pick that up on the brush, the simplest way, just by tapping the brush, you get a little splatter effect. It actually took me a while to get able to just tap it and get what I wanted. And what I used to do is hit it with another brush. Don't know if you can see that. Yeah, so it's a slightly different effect you get. If you tap it, you can be a bit more precise about where your splatters are going to go. They tend to come out in a linear way in that way, whereas if you bash it with something else, it's a much bigger effect, which is fine if that's what you want, and I still do that sometimes, but I've just learned to enjoy this other method more. It's not always obvious where it's going to go, so one thing to be aware of is if you have a little bit of tissue nearby while it's still wet, you can lift them, not always completely, but you can certainly take away a lot of the splatter effect you've got. It's worth experimenting as well with the amount of pigment. So if we make a much thicker mix there and tap, you get smaller flecks which are more intense. And then if we add way more water, so let's just keep going there and pick all that up, you get these much bigger splashes, and they're less controlled, but you get more interesting sort of snowflake patterns as well. So the next obvious thing to then try is what happens if we vary the size of the brush. So that first brush I was using was a size 6. It's actually quite a small size 6. This one is a size 16, so a really big difference. Now, I think it's probably obvious what's going to happen. Actually, why don't we do a different colour for an effect? So I'll do, that was a Scarlet Lake, a primary red. We'll do a phthalo blue here. So again, lots of water. You do have to really load up the brush when you're doing this, otherwise not much will come out. So I've got quite a watery thing there. And with a big brush, you probably guessed it, you get bigger splatters, slightly less controlled, but just as interesting. And again, if we just go in quickly, you can see how you can really vary the intensity. So though you can't necessarily take it all away, you can take a lot of it away. Now, what's next? So we've done wet on dry there, so the paper's completely dry. So this isn't completely clean water, but what happens if we do wet on wet? So if I just wet this lovely corner, and let's do another colour. So I've got a nice viridian here. So that's quite an intense green. Actually, this might be a Windsor, just looking at it might be a Windsor green yellow shade, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's an intense green. And I'm going to go back to my small size 6, I'm using a sort of fairly watery wash again. And you can see the sheen here where I've wetted the paper. And if we just tap, you can see we get these splatters, but then they start to spread out. And after a little while, some of them will join together, they'll move around with the shape of the paper as it starts to warp a bit with that water. And it can be a nice way of creating a lot of interest, say in a sky or in a field. Another good way of doing it wet on wet, if I just create a sort of meadowy field here with that's a little bit of Hansa yellow and some gold green, just to create a little simulation of a field. We take our green and drop that in. Get some lovely textures already just adding in. You could go in again and just move some of those around. But you can see, you could imagine a sky or a field or water, all of those different things can be enhanced with just a few splashes. You can see how these textures are becoming really interesting now. And they don't always work, but they often work, often enough that it's worth trying and experimenting. Got another thing to try here as well. So if I pop in, we could pretend maybe this was going to be a lake or something. So you've got a block of relatively uniform pigment. And instead of dropping in more pigment, this time we can splash in some water. So you can see there the water now moves the pigment away. You get these cauliflowers. It's almost like a dappling effect, a dappled rain or something on a lake. You know, another way of doing it is just getting your fingers wet and you can flick. Or you can even try that with pigment so you can see the effect. Ooh, let's get a little bit more. So this is some green on my fingers. So it's very subtle, but you can see little drops of green going everywhere. And that's quite an effective way. I wouldn't normally do that with pigment, but it's quite an effective way of flicking a bit of water into an area you want to make not so flat. Bring out some texture, some movement. So they're my sort of brush effects, if you like, or my painting brush effects. Another good technique to try is with a toothbrush. So let's move on to yet another colour. Let's try a burnt sienna. So I'm just picking some vibrant colours here, so it's really easy to see what's happening. Again, you can just keep it a fairly watery wash. I've got my toothbrush here, just a normal medium bristled toothbrush, which I no longer use for brushing my teeth. Grab some pigment in there. If we pick this little gap here, there you go, you can see how it leaves these really fine flecks. It's absolutely not controlled, but it's a lovely way, say, of adding a bit of texture to a pavement with a grey tone or something, because it just leaves these quite densely packed but very faint dapples everywhere. So, what else can we do to create splashes and splatters? I'm just going to sketch in a couple of little scenes here. So this is a 9 by 12 inch piece of paper here, just to give you an idea of the size. So if I give myself a couple of small squares, and I give a little rolling scene and some kind of lighthouse there, maybe a little bush, and then we can do another, let's call this one a farmhouse. So you get the idea, just some little doodles in the corner here. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add in a sky to this first one. So this is the phthalo blue. I want it to be nice and wet. That's not quite wet enough yet. There we go. So if we make it nice and wet. Now, how can we enhance this without? We're not going to do some splashes this time. But how else can we enhance it? Well, one way, make it really wet. Literally just tilt the page and tap. Ooh, not wet enough. I'll add a bit more pigment in. It's easier when you've done a really big drawing and it's all wet in the sky. There we go. Hopefully wet enough now. So yeah, do that. And you tap and you can start to get these lovely effects moving. You'll see that by doing that, it can move everywhere. So if you've dropped pigment in, the pigment will likely move around. You might also end up just loosening up some of the boundaries where you perhaps wanted to keep this lighthouse clear. That's fine. Let's do a little bit of wet painting to bring our lighthouse back. And what's another way? Well, while this is still wet, you can try taking something like a straw. I've got my metal straw because I like at least try my best to be eco-friendly. He says while painting on a large piece of paper that I'm probably going to have to throw away. But while it's wet, you can pop the straw there and blow. And there you go. You can see these really interesting spikes of colour coming up. If we add in a little field, let's pop a bit of yellow in there as well. Again, you can do the same thing. And you can imagine if you controlled that a little bit more and had a plan of what you wanted, you can have these little spikes of colour moving around, or you could use it in a sort of forest area to create branches and things between patches of green. I don't often use a straw again because I don't often carry one around with me. What I tend to do, let's do slightly different blue this time. We're going to go with some cobalt. So here we go. Again, keep it nice and watery. I'm a bit more confident with this method because I use it a lot more. All you have to do, get your head in and blow. And you can easily move it around and you can actually get very good at controlling. So I knew what I was doing there. I knew I was blowing this bit out, that bit out. And you can see that it moves pigment around as well. So where I've blown, it's become paler. And then we've got these darker areas. And when it dries, that will be really obvious. I can make that more obvious if we just pop some of our cobalt in this big fallow blue area we did earlier. And if I blow on that, you can see really obviously that it's changing the concentration of pigment here. All right. So I hope that you can see from just these little exercises how many interesting things you can do with your brushes, without your brushes, with other inappropriate implements like straws and toothbrushes, and even just with your hands, having a nice play around with colours and how these can really bring scenes to life or just be really interesting things to play with. Thanks for watching again. If you enjoyed it, please do like and subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram. And the last thing I always want to add is this technique is inspired by or copied from a chap called Andrew J. Jeweler on Instagram. And I promised him if I ever wrote a book, and I guess this is like a video book, that I would credit him with the technique. I think it's fantastic, and honestly he does it absolutely amazingly, using it on lots of skies and greens and textures. It's amazing. So check out his Instagram if you want to see more interesting splash effects. Alright, have a good day everyone. Thanks for watching.